Historians enlarged this 1875 photo, what they found between the boys. Hands broke their hearts. Dr. Amelia Richardson had been cataloging Civil War-era photographs at the Virginia Historical Society for 6 months. When she found the image that would change everything, it was a humid afternoon in July 2024, and she was working through a collection donated by the estate of a Richmond family, the Whitfields, who had lived in the city since before the Revolution. The photograph was dated October 1875 on the back, taken 10 years after the war's end. It showed 2 boys, approximately 12 or 13 years old, standing in front of a grand columned mansion. Both wore formal clothing, dark jackets, white shirts, bow ties. Both stared at the camera with the serious expressions common in early photography, when subjects had to remain perfectly still for long exposures. One boy was white, with light hair and pale skin. The other was black, with dark skin and close-cropped hair. They stood about a foot apart, their postures rigid and formal. At first glance, Amelia assumed it was a typical post-war photograph, a young master and a servant, posed together in the paternalistic style of the Reconstruction era. Such images were common, meant to show the kindness of white families toward black people, while maintaining clear social hierarchies. But something about the image nagged at her. The boys' positioning seemed deliberate, almost staged beyond the usual formality. Their hands hung at their sides, but there was something odd about the space between them. Amelia pulled out her digital microscope and connected it to her computer. She positioned the photograph under the lens and began examining it section by section, increasing the magnification slowly. When she reached the area between the boys' hands, she stopped breathing. There, barely visible in the shadowed space between their bodies, was something she hadn't noticed before: a small piece of paper, folded and held between their index fingers, each boy grasping one edge. The paper was positioned so carefully that it was nearly invisible unless you knew to look for it. Amelia's hands trembled as she adjusted the microscope. Under maximum magnification, she could see writing on the visible edge of the paper, though she couldn't make out the words. "My God," she whispered to the empty archive room. "What were you hiding?" Amelia spent the rest of the day photographing the image from every angle, using different lighting techniques and digital enhancement software. By evening, she had managed to isolate and enhance the small piece of paper visible between the boys' hands. The writing was in pencil, faded but still partially legible. She could make out fragments: ... promise ... brothers forever ... no matter what ... It was a note. A promise of some kind, held secretly between 2 boys who weren't supposed to be equals, weren't supposed to be friends, and certainly weren't supposed to be brothers. Amelia called her colleague Dr. Marcus Hayes, who specialized in Reconstruction-era race relations in Virginia. He arrived within an hour, his excitement palpable as she showed him the enhanced images. "This is extraordinary," Marcus said, leaning close to the monitor. "Do you understand what this means?" These boys were defying every social convention of 1875 Richmond. If anyone had discovered this photograph and understood what it showed, both boys could have faced severe consequences. "Can we find out who they were?" Amelia asked. "The Whitfield collection. Let me check the provenance record." They spent the next 3 hours combing through documentation. The mansion in the photograph was identified as the Whitfield estate on Gray Street, one of Richmond's most prestigious addresses. The property records showed it had been owned by Charles Whitfield, a tobacco merchant, from 1860 until 1878, when it was sold. In the 1870 census, Charles Whitfield was listed with his wife Margaret and son Thomas, age 8. Living in a separate dwelling on the property were Samuel and Ruth Carter, both listed as colored, ages 35 and 32, with a son named Isaac, age 6. By 1875, Thomas Whitfield would have been 13. Isaac Carter would have been 11. "That's them," Amelia said, pointing to the names. "Thomas and Isaac." Marcus nodded slowly. The Carters were likely formerly enslaved by the Whitfield family before the war. After emancipation, many free people stayed on their former plantations as paid laborers, especially if they had nowhere else to go. The boys would have grown up together. As playmates? Possibly, when they were very young. But by 1875, the social codes would have required separation. Richmond was deeply segregated, and white families were under enormous pressure to maintain racial hierarchies. Whatever friendship these boys had would have needed to be secret. Amelia looked at the photograph again, at the 2 solemn faces staring across 149 years. What happened to them? We need to find out. Amelia began with Thomas Whitfield, whose family records were more extensive. The Whitfields had been prominent in Richmond society, and their movements were well documented in newspapers, legal records, and social registers. Thomas Whitfield appeared in census records through 1880, still living at the Gray Street mansion with his parents. But in 1878, something dramatic had changed. The family no longer owned the property. It had been sold to a banking family, the Hastings, for a fraction of its former value. Amelia found the explanation in bankruptcy records. Charles Whitfield's tobacco business had collapsed in 1877, losing everything in bad investments and unpaid debts. The family had been forced to sell the mansion and most of their possessions. By 1880, the Whitfields were living in a modest rented house in a less fashionable part of Richmond. Charles was listed as a clerk. Margaret took in sewing. Thomas, now 18, worked as a bookkeeper. The fall from wealth to near poverty must have been devastating. Thomas appeared again in the 1890 census, now married to a woman named Elizabeth, working as an accountant. They had one child, a daughter named Sarah. The family lived in a small house on the outskirts of Richmond, far from the grand neighborhood where Thomas had grown up. In 1900, Thomas was still working as an accountant, his salary modest but steady. He never recovered his family's former wealth or social position. The final record Amelia found was Thomas's death certificate from 1923. He had died at age 61 of pneumonia, survived by his wife and daughter. He was buried in Oakwood Cemetery in an unmarked grave. The family couldn't afford a headstone. But there was something else in the death records that caught Amelia's attention. The informant listed on Thomas's death certificate, the person who had provided information about his life and arranged his burial, was not his wife or daughter. It was someone named Isaac Carter. Amelia's heart began racing. After nearly 50 years, Isaac had been there at Thomas's death. Despite everything that should have separated them, the connection had survived. But who was Isaac Carter, and what had become of him? Finding information about Isaac Carter proved far more difficult. Records for black families in the post-Civil War South were often incomplete, lost, or never properly maintained in the first place. But Amelia persisted, searching through church records, Freedmen's Bureau documents, and black community newspapers. She found Isaac in the 1880 census, living with his parents Samuel and Ruth in a small house on the outskirts of Richmond. Samuel worked as a carpenter, Ruth as a laundress. Isaac, now 16, was listed as a student, and remarkable achievement for a young black man in 1880 Virginia, when education for black children was limited and often dangerous to pursue. By 1890, Isaac had become a teacher at a school for black children, operating out of a church basement in Richmond's Jackson Ward neighborhood. The salary was minimal, barely enough to survive, but the work was vital. Marcus found a mention of Isaac in a black community newspaper from 1892, praising his dedication to education and his work helping formerly enslaved adults learn to read. In 1900, Isaac had opened his own school, the Carter Institute, which offered both primary education and adult literacy classes. The school operated in a small building he had managed to purchase through years of saving. He had married a woman named Grace, a fellow teacher, and they had 3 children. But what struck Amelia most was what she found in Isaac's will, filed after his death in 1935. Among his possessions, he left to his eldest son the half medallion given to me by my brother in heart, Thomas Whitfield, in the year 1875, which I have carried every day of my life, half a medallion. The promise between the boys' hands in the photograph wasn't just paper. It had been accompanied by a physical symbol, something they could each carry as proof of their bond. "We need to find that medallion," Amelia said to Marcus. "And we need to find out if Thomas had the other half." Marcus nodded, but his expression was troubled. "Amelia, I found something else about what happened in 1878 when the Whitfield family..." "What?" "It wasn't just bad business decisions. Charles Whitfield was accused of race mixing, of allowing his son to associate too closely with the Carter boy. Several business partners withdrew their support explicitly because of rumors that Thomas and Isaac were friends. In 1877 Richmond, that was enough to destroy a white family's reputation and livelihood." Amelia felt sick. They were punished for being friends. Yes, and they were torn apart. Because of it, Amelia found the details in a letter preserved in the Whitfield family papers, written by Margaret Whitfield to her sister in 1878. The letter had been tucked into a Bible, likely never meant to be seen by historians. "My dear sister," the letter began, "our lives have been utterly destroyed, and it is my own foolishness that brought this upon us. I allowed Thomas to grow too close to the Carter boy when they were children, thinking it harmless play between innocent boys. I did not understand the consequences until it was too late. Charles's business partners discovered that Thomas and Isaac had been meeting in secret. exchanging letters, even studying together from the same books. They called it unnatural, said we were encouraging dangerous ideas of equality. One by one, they severed their ties with Charles. His credit was withdrawn, his reputation was ruined. We have lost everything, the house, the furnishings, our position in society. We are disgraced. And I blame myself for not seeing the danger, for not separating the boys sooner. I have forbidden Thomas from ever speaking to Isaac again. I made him watch as I burned every letter, every small gift they had exchanged over the years. He wept like his heart was breaking, but it had to be done. He must understand that such friendships are impossible, that the world will not tolerate them. We leave Gray Street next week for a smaller house in a different neighborhood. Perhaps in time people will forget, but I fear Thomas will never forgive me, and perhaps he shouldn't. Amelia set the letter down, her vision blurred with tears. She imagined Thomas at 16, forced to watch his mother destroy the evidence of the most important relationship in his life, knowing he would never be allowed to see Isaac again. But the death certificate had listed Isaac as the informant in 1923, 45 years after the separation. Somehow, despite their mother's fears and society's prohibitions, the connection had survived. Marcus had been researching parallel records. I found something in the Carter family documents, he said quietly. Ruth Carter wrote to a friend in 1878, describing what happened. She says that after the Whitfields lost their home, Isaac tried to visit Thomas at their new address. He was turned away by Margaret, who threatened to call the police if he returned. Isaac came home devastated, and Ruth had to explain to her 11-year-old son why he couldn't see his best friend anymore. But they found each other again, Amelia said. They must have, yes. But how and when? The answer came from an unexpected source. Amelia received an email from a woman named Patricia Morris, who had seen a news article about the photograph research. Patricia explained that her great-grandfather had been Isaac Carter, and she had some of his personal belongings. I have boxes of my great-grandfather's papers, Patricia wrote. Letters, photographs, documents from his school. My family has been meaning to donate them to a museum, but we never got around to it. After reading about your research, I looked through the boxes and found something I think you need to see. They met at Patricia's home in Richmond 3 days later. She led them to a spare bedroom where several cardboard boxes were stacked against the wall, filled with the remnants of Isaac Carter's life. Patricia reached into one box and pulled out a small leather pouch, worn soft with age. This was in his pocket when he died, she said. My grandmother kept it, passed it to my mother, and my mother gave it to me. I never understood what it was until now. She opened the pouch and poured its contents into her palm. A small brass medallion, roughly the size of a silver dollar, broken in half with a jagged edge. On the visible side, engraved in careful script, were the words, Brothers in Heart, 1875. Amelia gasped. This is what they were holding in the photograph. This is the promise. Patricia nodded, tears in her eyes. There's more. She handed Amelia a bundle of letters tied with string, yellowed with age. These are from Thomas Whitfield to my great-grandfather. They span from 1890 to 1923. Amelia carefully untied the string and opened the first letter. Dated March 1890. Dear Isaac, it read. It has been 12 years since my mother forbade me from seeing you, and not a single day has passed when I did not think of you and grieve for what we lost. I am married now, working as an accountant, living a life that looks respectable on the surface but feels hollow. I hope this letter finds you. I hope you remember me as I remember you, as my brother, my truest friend, the person who knew me better than anyone ever has or ever will. If you are willing, I would like to see you again. Your friend always, Thomas. Amelia looked up at Patricia. Did Isaac respond? Yes, and they corresponded for the next 33 years. Amelia and Marcus spent days reading through the correspondence between Thomas and Isaac. The letters painted a picture of two men who had been forced apart by racism and social pressure, but who refused to let their friendship die. In Isaac's first response, dated April 1890, he wrote, Thomas, your letter reached me like water in a desert. I have missed you every day since we were separated. I became a teacher because you taught me to love learning when we studied together as boys. I built a school because I wanted to create a place where children like us children who see past the barriers that adults build could learn and grow together. I still have my half of the medallion. I will keep it until I die. The letters revealed that they met in secret several times over the years, always carefully, always aware of the danger. In 1895, Thomas wrote, I met you yesterday at the river, and those 2 hours felt like coming home after years of wandering. We are grown men now with families and responsibilities, yet when I am with you, I feel like the boy I was at 13, before the world taught me who I was supposed to hate and who I was supposed to be. I will never forgive this world for what it took from us. In 1902, Isaac wrote about his school. The Carter Institute grows each year. We now teach 60 children and 25 adults. Your donations, sent anonymously as always, have made this possible. You gave up so much when your family fell from wealth, yet you still find ways to support this work. You honor the promise we made as boys to be brothers regardless of what the world demands. So Thomas had been secretly funding Isaac's school for years, even though his own financial circumstances were modest. The friendship wasn't just emotional, it was active, supportive, sacrificial. In 1918, during the influenza pandemic, Thomas wrote, "I heard that your wife Grace was ill. I am sending money for a doctor, though I know you will refuse it. Please for once let me help. You have spent your life giving to others. Let someone give to you." Grace Carter survived, though Isaac's letters from that period showed how close she had come to death. The final letter was from Isaac to Thomas, dated January 1923, just weeks before Thomas's death. "My dear friend, I received word that you are gravely ill. I am coming to see you, and I do not care who knows it or what they say. We wasted too many years hiding. I will not hide anymore. You are my brother, and I will be with you at the end." Patricia wiped tears from her face. My great-grandfather was there when Thomas died. He sat with him through the final night, holding his hand. Thomas's wife Elizabeth allowed it, even though it was scandalous. She said Thomas kept asking for Isaac, kept saying, "Where is my brother?" She knew what they meant to each other. "Did Thomas have the other half of the medallion?" Amelia asked Patricia. "I don't know. His family might have kept it, or it might have been lost." Amelia reached out to descendants of Thomas Whitfield. His great-granddaughter, Linda Whitfield Harrison, lived in Richmond and agreed to meet with them. Linda was in her 70s, a retired librarian with a gentle manner and sharp memory. "I've heard family stories about my great-grandfather," she said, as she welcomed them into her home. "He was apparently a very sad man, though no one ever explained why. My grandmother said he kept a small box that he never let anyone open, and when he died, he asked to be buried with it." "Buried with it?" Marcus repeated. "So, it's in his grave?" "Presumably, but there's no headstone. My family couldn't afford one in 1923. And by the time we had money again, no one remembered exactly where he was buried. Oakwood Cemetery has records, but they're incomplete from that period." Amelia felt a surge of determination. "We need to find that grave over the next 2 weeks." They worked with Oakwood Cemetery administration and ground-penetrating radar specialists to locate Thomas Whitfield's unmarked grave. The technology showed a burial in the section where records indicated he should be, and with permission from Linda and the cemetery, they obtained a court order for exhumation. The process was respectful and careful. When the simple wooden casket was opened, they found Thomas Whitfield's remains and, clutched in his skeletal hand, a small metal box. Inside the box was the other half of the medallion. When placed together, the two halves formed a complete circle. The engraving read, "Brothers in Heart, 1875, no matter what the world says." Amelia held both pieces together, completing the promise that had been broken 149 years ago. Thomas and Isaac had each kept their half for their entire lives, through separation, hardship, secret meetings, and decades of enforced distance. Neither had ever let go. "They kept their promise," Patricia whispered. "Both of them, until the very end." Linda reached out and touched the medallion gently. "I never knew. My family never told us that my great-grandfather had a black friend, that they were so close. I suppose they were ashamed or didn't understand." "They were brothers," Amelia said softly, "in every way that mattered." Amelia and Marcus prepared their findings for publication, knowing the story would resonate far beyond academic circles. The photograph, the letters, the medallion together. They told a story of friendship that had transcended one of the most rigidly racist periods in American history. In September 2024, the Virginia Historical Society opened an exhibition titled, "Brothers in Heart: The Hidden Friendship of Thomas Whitfield and Isaac Carter." The centerpiece was the original 1875 photograph, displayed alongside the reunited medallion halves and selected letters from their correspondence. The exhibition drew enormous crowds. People stood in front of the photograph for long minutes, studying the two boys' faces, imagining what it had cost them to maintain that secret friendship. Many visitors wept openly. The story was picked up by national media. NPR featured it on their morning program. The New York Times ran a front-page article. The photograph went viral on social media, with millions of people sharing it and commenting on the tragedy and beauty of the boys' bond. Patricia Morris and Linda Harrison appeared together at the exhibition opening, descendants of the two friends standing side by side just as their ancestors had 149 years earlier. "Our great-grandfathers loved each other," Patricia said during her speech. "Not romantically, but as true brothers, the kind of bond that society tried to destroy but couldn't. They paid a terrible price for that friendship." Thomas's family lost everything because he refused to hate Isaac. Isaac lived his entire life knowing that his mere existence had cost his friend dearly. Yet neither of them ever gave up. Neither of them ever stopped honoring the promise they made as boys. Linda spoke next, her voice shaking with emotion. "I was raised to be proud of my family's history, but no one ever told me the most important part, that my great-grandfather was a man of extraordinary courage and loyalty. He defied every social rule, risked everything, gave up his family's wealth and status, all because he refused to abandon his friend. That's the legacy I want to claim. That's the ancestor I want to honor." The exhibition included a section showing the impact of enforced segregation on countless other friendships, families, and communities. Marcus had compiled evidence of other cross-racial relationships that had been destroyed or hidden during the Jim Crow era, not just in the South, but across America. Thomas and Isaac were not unique, Marcus explained to visitors. There were thousands of friendships like theirs, bonds formed in childhood before society taught people to see skin color as a barrier. But most of those friendships were crushed and most left no record. We're fortunate that Thomas and Isaac found a way to preserve theirs, even if they had to hide it. On a warm October afternoon in 2024, exactly 149 years after the photograph was taken, a ceremony was held at Oakwood Cemetery. Thomas Whitfield's grave finally received a headstone, purchased through donations from people who had been moved by the story. The headstone read, "Thomas Whitfield, 1862 to 1923. Beloved father, husband and brother in heart to Isaac Carter. A man who chose love over hatred." Beside Thomas's grave, the Carter family arranged for a companion stone for Isaac, who was buried in a black cemetery across town. The inscription read, "Isaac Carter, 1864 to 1935. Educator, leader, and brother in heart to Thomas Whitfield. A man who built bridges while others built walls." Patricia and Linda stood together at the ceremony, along with dozens of descendants from both families. Many had never known they were connected until the story emerged. "Our families were bound together by friendship 149 years ago," Patricia said. "They stayed connected through decades of forced separation and social prohibition. Today, we honor that bond publicly, the way they never could." Linda added, "Thomas and Isaac couldn't change the world they lived in, but they refused to let that world change who they were. They kept their promise to each other for their entire lives. We're here to make sure that promise is never forgotten." The ceremony concluded with the two halves of the medallion being donated to the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture, where they would be displayed together permanently. Amelia stood at the edge of the gathering, watching the descendants of Thomas and Isaac embrace, exchange phone numbers, promise to stay in touch. Two families, divided by racism for 149 years, finally reunited by the truth that had been hidden in a photograph all along. She thought about that October day in 1875, when two boys had stood before a camera and secretly held a promise between their hands. They must have known the danger, must have understood that what they felt for each other, that pure, colorblind friendship was something the world would try to destroy. But they had held on anyway. Through separation, poverty, shame, and decades of enforced silence, they had held on. And now, nearly 150 years later, the world finally knew. The photograph that had seemed to show nothing but formality and distance actually captured one of the most profound friendships in American history, a brotherhood that had survived everything society threw at it. Amelia looked at the two headstones side by side, now in spirit if not in location. Thomas and Isaac would never be forgotten. Their promise had been kept, their story told, their love honored, and between their hands, visible now to anyone who cared to look, was the truth that had always been there. Some bonds are stronger than hate, deeper than prejudice, and more enduring than injustice. Brothers in heart. No matter what the world says, forever,